Welcome back to Every Doctor Who Ever. Today we're talking about Doctor Who Season 4. No, not the one in the mid-2000s, but the one in 1966 to 67. We, of course, already talked about the first two stories involving the first Doctor with our little William Hartnell video, so if you're interested into seeing what exactly happened in the Smugglers and the 10th Planet, which, of course, is the first appearance of the Cybermen, then you can go ahead and watch those from that video. Today we are starting with the power of the Daleks and going all the way to the end with the evil of the Daleks. Two Dalek storylines in one season, surely that wouldn't happen ever again, now would it? Now we of course are starting with the Patrick Troughton era. It is a very different era than previous one. This one is a little bit more sci-fi than previous, right? We had obviously sci-fi stories throughout this whole time, but now we have, more of a focus on it than ever so before. Now, there is still historical ones. Not only was there the Smugglers, but also today we'll be talking about the Higlanders, which is the very last historical story all the way until 1982, of course, so it's, happy for me, but more importantly, we'll have more of a sci-fi focus on how you expect Doctor Who to be going forward, especially in the next season and season 6 onward, right? But of course, this season shows quite a bit of changes, while also somehow staying the exact same. The producer, who will be the same thing throughout this season and the next, is Inez Lloyd, who will continue pushing for this series to feel a little bit cheaper throughout the next season or so, due to the fact that he, wants to make sure everything is spread enough to make sure the budget doesn't push itself as it constantly did in previous seasons. There is no, production notes at any point in any of these episodes that shows you any problem with the actual budgetary issues, right? So, good on him. The script editor for most of it is also still Jerry Davis, who will remain all the way with his boy Inez Lloyd till the end of season 5, so we'll certainly get to them leaving the show later on, but until that point, that is who is in charge of the show. For our first little story, Power of the Daleks, the writer is David Whitaker and also Dennis Spooner. Dennis Spooner goes uncredited, but he did ultimately rewrite quite a bit of the story. David Whitaker was actually pretty unhappy with Dennis Spooner's rewrites, and Terry Nation, of course the maker of the Daleks, wasn't very happy about how exactly the Power of the Daleks goes. Our director is the director of Rescue and the Savages, Christopher Barry, and this of course is our very first post-regeneration story. Now of course when the second Doctor comes out, he is quite, frazzled. He doesn't quite know who he is, and that's entirely understandable. He opens up a drawer to see what exactly is in it, and he looks and goes, oh, ooh, and the two companions that are with him are very confused into how to exactly feel about this. With both of our companions being very confused on how to exactly feel about this, it was clear that this was the right way to do it. Now, though, in terms of talking about the Doctors from Doctor to Doctor, I did start with this in terms of the beginning of our Season 4 video. Season 4 obviously has this after its third story. It's been through a multitude of episodes, and at this point, 3 seasons of one Doctor changed to another was certainly not something easy to understand. So to have the companions be very confused on how to feel about it was probably the right way to do it. The way they decided to go with this Doctor was the right way to have the first Doctor's regeneration, or as it was, renewal at the time. The people were confused for a good number of decades that if or if not the first and second Doctor's little change there was him getting younger or him actively regenerating as he would going forward, right? Now it would be all the way up until the 11th Doctor going, yes, I had this amount of lives, this is a second me, and then for eventually the first Doctor to have the little shiny hands later on in Twice Upon a Time for finally fans to shut the fuck up. But it really shows you how weird the earlier Doctor Who stuff is when brought into the modern time frame of we're trying to make everyone understand things. Mind you, I'm pretty sure any confusion really should have been written off as the Doctor was very confused for the first couple of minutes, right? He doesn't even fully tell them if he is or isn't the Doctor, which I think also kind of goes into how much it helps fans begin to understand this character. And I also think, him being confused and saying, the TARDIS, it helped me, is not entirely incorrect, right? But sure, it's whatever. Thankfully, at this point we all know it's a regeneration, and it's the big iconic moment of the big shift in terms of what Doctor Who will become, and that we now have a new main actor alongside our newer companion. So I'm sure some fans were a little bit iffy on it, but thankfully enough stayed for this series to keep going. And I feel like the Second Doctor being a very different character, as we'll especially see throughout the story, really helped the series continue onwards in such a way that people wouldn't get tired of the First Doctor. I made a whole thing about it in the William Hartnell video, so if you want to see my opinions about how cool it is that we have Patrick Troughton, then go there. I will say, though, of course, at the start of rehearsals, both actors of Ben and Polly decided to prank Patrick Troughton by dressing up in t-shirts, which had comeback Bill Hartnell, all is forgiven, which is a little bit fucked up. I'm gonna be honest. Regardless, the three would become really good friends throughout this season in the behind the scenes of making this, and you can really tell that they quickly become good friends and have a lot of chemistry on screen. In Evil of the Daleks, we are on planet Vulcan, the idealized planet that some people, even all the way to the 60s, thought might have been a thing. Supposedly we're in the year 2020, but that really comes from extra material and is never really said in the story itself. An examiner from Earth is brought to the Earth colony of planet Vulcan, and he is shot, and we're incredibly unclear who the hell he was and why he was here. The Doctor in his goofy hat pretends to be him, and they meet with the governor of Vulcan. All of them wonder why he's there, and no one wants to really give the actual answer. Scientist Lesterton, which I'm pretty sure was named such a way in order to show that this guy wouldn't mess up the name Chesterton, Lesterson, you get it? Scientist man has found a capsule, and the Doctor wonders what's in it. Ultimately getting suspicious on it, he eventually goes inside and finds 3 Daleks. The Doctor tries to warn them to get rid of these things, but the scientist and also the head of security seems to really want to get this whole thing through, and they do convince the governor to let them continue. The Doctor is essentially like, all right, they'll see, and yeah, they sure do. As soon afterwards, a man named Quinn is arrested, and the Doctor tries to help him look into why exactly he's being framed for something, and they soon enough find that there is a real good reason why Bragan wants this experiment to go through. Not only is he responsible for killing the man that the Doctor is pretending to be, but soon enough they find out that he is in charge of this rebellion. Yeah, the reason why they really want the Daleks to help with, I don't know, something, is because there's a rebellion on the planet at the moment. They're barely in the episode, but they are an important part of the plot as they're repeatedly talked about. And again, our main villain, Bragan, is their leader. Now, how he's able to control the Daleks is very interesting. When they are brought out, they are shown to be these, like, subservient little, salt shaker boys. So it's very weird to see them just not want to kill people, like, immediately, but clearly this is all the actual point, right? And it's probably why Terry Nation didn't like this, thinking that, oh, now they're being controlled. It's like, Terry, I don't think you saw till the end of the plot, because the whole point is what you literally had them do in your 13-parter of pretending to help a guy till the end. The Daleks do trick people to pretending that they are their servants, which is very similar to what they'll later do in World War II, which is a weird sentence for those who don't understand the context, until ultimately helping Bragan take over the actual governess, which soon enough they turn on him. The Doctor has to sneak his way around with help of Lesterson, which ultimately brings them to the power source, and after breaking it, all of the Daleks shut down. Bragan is defeated entirely separately from this and not killed by the Daleks, which I find kind of funny, to be honest. But what is weird is that they are, like, powered, of course, by the same kind of static electricity that they were by the point of Skaro, which implies to me that this is while they were still exploring space, and these are, like, pre-invasion Daleks. Though weirdly, the novel War of the Daleks seemingly revealed that it was from way in the future, during the Civil War Daleks, a thing we'll certainly get to later on. But to be honest, I feel like that's kind of that doesn't make any sense. Why were they, like, less advanced on purpose? It doesn't explain that. I find the Power of the Daleks to be just kind of alright. It is a fine episode. It's certainly not bad. It is entertaining throughout it. It does not waste your time. It's a 4 episodes, so thank God that's a simple, like, story to get through. And the way it builds up the Daleks, I think, is very interesting. Having the Daleks be these villains that think more than they just go out and destroy things was definitely something that needed to be continued from what we kind of saw them do in the past. Having the Daleks be clearly a smart species of destructive aliens really adds to their menace and will be a very important thing of what they do going forward. thinking Daleks I find to be a better way of doing Daleks than, evil trash cans shooting at you, screaming Daleks. The characters introduced in this episode, I think, are perfectly fine. I think Lesterson that really gives the best performance. I think when he starts worrying about the Daleks, he really starts just going over the top, and I find that incredibly entertaining. And I think the villain was a pretty well-written villain of someone who naturally would be blinded by power and was taking advantage of the Daleks in a way that did make him seem like a total moron, the same way we saw the main villain of the previous 13-parter, right? Definitely was a good idea to bring them in as the other iconic, memorable monster to have the next Doctor face in order for him to be clearly shown to be the Doctor. Him recognizing them, him fighting them, him knowing about it was the perfect way to reintroduce the Doctor for the audience. In terms of reincarnation stories, this is one of the better ones because it really does a good job reintroducing this version of the character. I'll note that going forward, I'm not going to say my ratings of this until the edit, because I will certainly think differently later on, so just note that I thought it was pretty good in general. Not one of the best ones, certainly, but I think a recommend watch, because I still am a big fan of the Daleks, and you should watch every episode that involves the Daleks. Yeah, it's one that I think has some pretty good pacing despite it being 6 episodes, and is one I think is worth your time, if you're a Dalek fan like me. I'll note all 6 episodes are missing. Supposedly, in 2020, a user known as James Johnson uploaded several pictures of snippets sent to him from a private collection, showing never-before-seen frames of the original production of this storyline, which shows that maybe there's more of this that exists somewhere? They did try and look in Singapore from the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation in 1972, but found absolutely nothing of this episode, and as far as we can tell, there's no other parts of this story that could possibly be found anywhere else. In 2016, due to the 50th anniversary, a production of the animated recreation of this, which was initially given 10 months to make, was made in 5 months in order to fit that deadline, and unfortunately, a lot of people involved, mostly the director of the animated release, Charles Norton, really doesn't like how rushed the production was. Charles Norton, the director, especially in 2020, really mentioned that he hated how terrifyingly it didn't really feel like a finished result at all. Having, of course, watched the animated version, considering that's the versions I'll watch throughout this, I found it perfectly fine. I found it entirely acceptable. I actually prefer this style of animation as opposed to the more, attempted realistic-looking ones that are in certain other animated recreations. But you can tell how, in comparison to the other ones that are, especially the ones in color, that it's, not quite as fluid or as thought out as the other ones are. I hate that they ultimately don't think highly of it, but I think they did a good enough job with what they were given. Hell, I think they did a great job with what they were given. But hey, there you have it. Next up, the mentioned last pure historicals, the Higlanders. This one, of course, introduces Jamie McCrimmon. Jamie McCrimmon, who will be the basically main companion throughout the entirety of the Second Doctor's time, was not originally meant to be a companion. Fraser Hines, the actor of Jamie, was originally just meant to be a character in the episode, and he even mentioned, while on several DVD commentaries, that he filmed the scene of Jimmy watching the TARDIS leave. But because they just liked him so much, they brought him back on to film scenes on him continuing, and to continue onward with the show. Patrick Troughton absolutely loved Fraser Hines, and that's the reason why he and him have such a great chemistry throughout the entirety of their time, but Michael Craze and Annette Wills, who of course play Ben and Polly, originally not sure how they felt about Fraser coming on, mostly because they thought this now means less for them. And how when you see the fact that there's 3 companions, you do kind of feel like, oh, maybe it might get a bit crowded. But to be honest, I think all of them do a great job at really taking up a good enough amount of time to keep themselves as their own separate characters while sharing the screen with each other. Although, I will note, it does seem in places that Jamie kind of didn't seem like he was meant to be in the episodes he ended up being. So, in ways, they're both right, and in ways, they're wrong. The writer of this one is Jerry Davis, who did 10th Planet, with help of Elwyn Jones, who was initially commissioned to write the story, but he, in fact, was of no help at all, so because he was just busy working on Z-Cars and its spin-off Softly Softly. Those are two British shows of which I know nothing about. The director was Hugh David, who of course was an actor who was originally supposed to be the first Doctor himself, before the producers decided he was a little bit too young from what they were looking at. So, I'll note, I really don't care about this episode all too much. It is unfortunately a recommended episode, I'll tell you that right now, because it is an episode that introduces not just a companion, but one of the major ones that will be for a good majority of the show for the next 3 whole years, right? But the Highlanders themselves, it's not that great of a story. They're in Scotland after the Battle of Culloden. This, of course, is during a big process where one king wanted to be king again, so of course he got help from the Jacobin Revolution, which tried to get him back on the throne. It wouldn't work out. A fleeing group of these Jacobites find the Doctor and companions, think they're part of the bad guys, because they always do, until the Doctor is like, I can help your old man. Polly and the old man's daughter go off to get some water, but they're captured by some redcoats, and soon the rest of the Jacobins are collected by someone else who wants to sell them to slavery. Ultimately, Polly and her friend blackmail a redcoat to helping them escape, eventually bringing them to where the Doctor and friends are, to which they eventually fight for the ship. This oddly isn't the end of the story, because eventually they are nearly found by the guy who really wanted to sell them into slavery, whose name is Gray, who actually is a historical character, because people were historically shitty like that. Due to the fact that there's still the British that are looking for them, they decided to take Jamie with them just in case so he won't get absolutely murdered. Honestly, again, due to the fact that it was clearly filmed last minute, it really does feel like, oh, come with us, I guess. And he's like, okay, where are we going? The Highlanders is certainly another historical story. I've, notably the last 3 seasons, mentioned how much I don't like them and won't go into too much detail on why I don't like them more than I already have. Fact is, if you don't already get it, I find them boring when a chunk of the story is, oh, we don't like this, let's get out of here. We can't yet. Once we're all back together, let's go over there. We know where the TARDIS is. Let's just go and get it. Now, they're a little bit further away from the TARDIS, so there's at least a little bit, more there of they have to at least do something. But, there's really no stakes of, oh, are we going to do something here? Because we can't. Because it's history, you can't change it. So, I will note, Jamie also barely plays any real part in this story. So, it's weird that they decided to bring him along in storyline, right? Jamie sure is there and he tries to help the Doctor, but for the most part, he's one of the several Scotsmen that are like, this guy's weird. So nothing really stands out about him in terms of being a character from this story. I'm surprised they decided to bring him along more than anyone else. It would have made as much sense. Jamie gives not much of an actual first impression, but in his next story we'll see why Jamie is so much of a fun character going forward and why he is actively one of my favorite companions. Again, you kind of have to watch this one because it is Jamie's first appearance and you're really going to see where he came from, but it's boring. Fraser Hines has mentioned that this is his favorite one, only due to the fact that this was his first story, which I'm sure makes sense. Unfortunately, he got his wish of seeing the recreation of what is probably actually his favorite story, which is Evil of the Daleks, later on, as they decided to do that one instead of this one. I'd imagine this is one of the first ones that are higher on the list of ones they're probably going to animate first, more so than others. But that being said, yeah, it is purely telesnaps and pictures. It does suck that we can't really see this story, but, despite my opinion of this story, I will say it does suck that we can't quite see it in its initial form, right? And that kind of goes for all Doctor Who stories, but considering how important this one is, both this and The Mythmaker, I feel like, God, if we ever had to find any storylines, I do hope it's those two. It's weird to say, because I notably don't like the historicals, and I really shouldn't care, but considering their importance in who is involved in them, I would like to see them there found first, if it ever is found. Next, we have the Underwater Menace. This one is one that I notably was not looking forward to getting back into, and would quickly find out why. The writer is Jeffrey Orme. His writing career dates all the way back to 1936, and Doctor Who was one of his last writing jobs for TV. At the age of 62, he was essentially the oldest writer to have written for the series until 1984's The Twin Dilemma, with Anthony Stephen, who is 67. The director, however, is Julia Smith, no relation, the second woman to direct a Doctor Who story, who is notable for helping create EastEnders, an incredibly important and long-running British television show, and it's crazy that she'll go from this to that. Mostly because, turns out, in the behind the scenes, as mentioned by Enoch Wills in the DV commentary, the main cast didn't get along with her. They would just kind of fuck with her for a good majority of the time, and, you know, it kind of sucks to hear that considering that she did create EastEnders, but it seems like she was almost kind of like one of those managers that always wants you to be on the job and never talk and never have fun while making things. Essentially like the directors from Deep Space Nine from the Tales from that cast. Regardless, the underwater menace is a simpler one. It is Atlantis. This is the first of a few stories that seem to mention Atlantis, and considering where Atlantis will be later on in the show, it doesn't quite fit altogether as the same place, so, you know, Doctor Who continuity really is just a big old mess and can be whatever you want it to be. The Doctor and gang find themselves on a little rocky island, which the Doctor figures is volcanic, which will actually be important way later in the story. After exploring, they find themselves in this little tomb, which they find little bits like a bracelet from the 68 Olympics, so they just go, oh, we're probably in the 70s, like, what? Ultimately, they're taken by fish head, roly-poly fish heads, who ultimately try to sacrifice them to their god. The Doctor, due to the fact that he sees some very tasty food, decides that, oh, Professor Zarov is here. He made this food. And ultimately makes a bargain to try and get out of being, you know, killed. Dr. Zarov does help them, but then he sends them to other areas. The boys are sent to the mines. Polly is nearly turned into a fish person, of which looks like garbage in the initial live-action version of this, and that is all she really does, while Jamie and Ben get help from two dudes, Sean and Jacko, to try and escape. Ultimately, they are the people that are able to help the Doctor begin to figure out his plan to stop Zarov's plan. The Doctor finds out that Zarov has basically went absolutely insane, and he's not trying to raise Atlantis, but he's trying to explode the planet. In the early drafts of the story, Zarov's reason to do this was because he was driven mad by the deaths of his wife and kid in a car, which probably was a little bit too dark, but then again, so is blowing up the planet, so why'd we remove that? Reading that, I think, made a little bit more sense of this very, like, stereotypically evil scientist that we get throughout this story. Zarov is not a great character. He's hilarious, but he's not a well-written character. He is stereotypically evil scientist, and that's what the Doctor has to deal with the entire time. You'd think this would be very entertaining considering it's fish people and all that, but it really isn't. It's just kind of stupid. Even with the very nice animated recreation making up for the awful effects of the, like, original live-action version, it's still just kind of there. With the help of Sean and Jacko, the tribe eventually does turn on Zarov, who, despite all of it, has his own guards, and after taking out the leader of the tribe, begins his plan of flooding Atlantis and using that to, due to the fact that they are in a rocky little island, get to the center of the Earth and blow it up from there. Ultimately, after, like, locking himself in, the Doctor turns off the lights and then he then goes, well, you can't trick me, Doctor, and then opens the door that he locked for the Doctor to do them lock him out of the only room that has the button that would explode the planet. What an idiot. That's how he is defeated? By locking him out of a room with the only button? Yeah, great genius mind there. Ultimately, Atlantis is flooded and a bunch of people probably die, and our companions nearly think that after they get separated that each of them die, but thankfully all of them are able to reunite and escape this crazy rock island. I imagine the fish people are still around doing something, considering they are fish people and are able to survive, so somewhere there are fish people that were genetically changed to breathe underwater. Considering this is still the 1970s, what happened to them? Did they go back to regular society? Or are they just now the only people living under Atlantis? Atlantis post this has never been seen, so God knows what happens to these fish people. Now, mind you, these fish people are seen again in some other stories, but it's whatever. Episodes 2 and 3 are still existing, but all 4 were animated, and I feel that's the better way to watch them. To note, though, the third episode was found during the big audit of 77, where a good majority of missed episodes were found. Well, episode 2 was returned to the BBC archives in 2011, oddly missing 2 seconds of footage, Thankfully, due to the fact that, again, a bunch of cool guys kept the audio for the show, which is how we get the audio for any of the missing episodes, they know what exactly happened there, and it was recreated in home releases, which I find very interesting. Also interesting is the fact that Ben, Polly, and the Doctor are all heard thinking to themselves. This isn't the only time this happens in this season, as it also happens in the next story, The Moon Base, and I don't quite know why. Now, I don't think this is a good story at all, frankly, right? And none of it really, like, angers me in any way. It's just really badly written, right? Nothing really of any substance happens in this, but I feel like I want to say more on why exactly it's bad. But again, its animated version kind of makes up for any of the really awful-looking effects that it absolutely had. But I still think the story is just very weak. The evil scientist is an absolute goofball and is too damn stupid to be any threatening force, and the fact that it does kind of feel like it treads the same water for a bit as the Doctor, as he will often in not just the classic series, but also this season in general, try to convince the leader of an area that a villain is doing villain things. The guy goes, nah, it couldn't be, before then the villain does villain things, and they goes, oops, should have listened. It's a little bit dumb, right? It's just kind of dumb. I do not recommend this story at all. I can not. I feel like this is a definite skip, right? There's worse stories, and that's why I feel like a bunch of people that I saw online talking about it when I gave my opinion, like in some comments, which, yeah, that's on me, right? But, like, you know, them being like, oh, but it's underrated, man. You just gotta give it a rewatch. And it's like, yeah, here's my rewatch. I still don't like The Underwater Menace. Neither does a good majority of the cast, and is certainly not the producer, with director Maurice Barry, the distant relative of Christopher Barry, and the director of not just this, but Tomb of the Cybermen and later Dominators. We have a story that will certainly be very similar to other Cybermen stories, and yeah, it certainly is. The Doctor, though he promised to go to Mars at the end of the previous story, ends up getting knocked around by a bunch of meteors and ends up being on the moon base. The moon base where they have the weather machine, which is sure is a thing. They are now 100 or so years later in 2070, where we will apparently have a weather machine by that point. It's weird to consider that a weather machine is on the moon, and it seems to be like a pretty important thing to have the weather be a certain way, but note that for the future of that's what like humans had. So if we're ever at a point where like we're post 2070s, note that a weather machine is controlling the weather, and whatever weather problems are a thing are done purely on purpose, which, as you'll note, is a big egg of a dragon. So yeah. After messing around on the moon, they find the mentioned moon base and soon see that there are people being affected by some weird disease, which gives them marker drawings on them. While they're figuring out what exactly that is, we soon find the enemy that's the reason for it, the very evil spirit that Jamie's clan is afraid of, the Piper! Or the Cybermen, as I have already stated, who of course take over the base. Very similar to the 10th planet, they take over the base, they find their weakness, they shove it in their holes, and then they inevitably find a way to get rid of the rest of them. It's cool that the Doctor uses the, like, gravity control or whatever to, like, fling a bunch of them into space, which, sure, there's a bunch of them in space now. I'll note that this, of course, thing is called Neurotrope X, and I was assuming it was maybe part of what, like, helped them turn them into Cybermen, because, you know, obviously their plan was to turn all of them into more Cybermen, but alright. But no, it's actively entirely unimportant. I'll note that, of course, the Cybermen were supposed to have originally come from Mondas and were going to be on Talos. The Telosian Cybermen will certainly be a thing that will be later on, but it's cool that even by this point, they were starting to bring in other origins of Cybermen, and, you know, even early this on, be so confusing about the chronology of their enemies. Much to Inez Lloyd's disappointment, this of course will be the last recorded at Riverside Studios, the studio that had been all the way back since more or less season 2, and it's very interesting to see that I didn't notice a difference, and I don't really know why they had to trade studios at all, so there you go. So this story is an okay one. If you like the Cybermen, you'll like this storyline. Hell, you might like it more than the 10th planet because it has more Cybermen after they actually appear. Again, I've mentioned I don't like how the 10th planet just gets rid of them and then brings them back, but I find that episode to be much better written, much more suspenseful, and much more impactful than this one, which just kind of quickly brings them back, puts some ping pong balls on them, has them zap people and give them goop disease, and then get destroyed by acid, right? Just kind of whatever. I'm not that big of a fan of their design here as compared to later or even the previous one, but it's okay. And I feel like their robot voice isn't as cool as, again, before and after. I'd say this isn't the weakest showing of the Cybermen, but one of the weaker ones. They don't really feel as much of a menace as they are in other storylines, and they really just feel like a quick little annoyance that the Doctor happens to deal with, right? And the episode also firmly feels like almost exactly the same storyline as the 10th Planet, which was only 3 to 4 stories ago, so it's really noticeable to have 2 Cybermen stories in the same season, right? When will that ever happen again, am I right? It is cool that they came back, though, to really supplant them as the, new recurring villain, which, of course, was the initial idea from the producers at this time. Bring in the Cybermen, get rid of the Daleks, but not for the reasons you'd expect. We'll get there later, though. I'll note that I can't necessarily recommend this one, but I also don't say skip this one. This is one of those you kind of gotta make your own sort of, opinion on. I find it perfectly fine, but one that really didn't, blow my mind in any way, and really didn't leave any impact on me. Hell, I forgot this story was in this season, to be honest. In fact, I can say kind of the same about a good majority of this season for one reason or another. Now we get to the Macra Terror, the first story to feature the lead actor's face in the opening sequence, which will be the same way all the way to the end of the classic era. All 4 episodes are missing from the archives, however, all 4 parts were, of course, reanimated in a very nice animation, which, of course, was given much more time to make. Originally directed by John Davies, the Macra Terror, as it is missing all of its episodes, has made Davies one of 3 directors, alongside Michael Leeson Smith of the Mythmakers and Hugh David from the Higlanders, to not have a single surviving Doctor Who episode. Originally written by Ian Stewart Black, who of course had written the similarly missing Savages, and then later on The War Machine. After being scared by Big Crab Claw, they're ultimately a little bit wary, and after they find a man who's running at them, who they don't realize is escaping from the human colony on this planet, they take him down and are then sent by the chief of police, who allow them to visit this human colony. It seems very happy and very culty as they're all singing to their overseer. Then quickly things turn very bad because soon enough, the Doctor asks the guy that they had tackled in the desert what's going on, and he tells them, big crabs. The man who is in charge, who is the second command to the overseer, known as the pilot, is asked about big crabs, but everyone, including him, denies the existence specifically of big crabs. Soon, mind control waves start taking over people. Jamie isn't affected and is able to wake up Polly before she's affected, but Ben becomes essentially mind controlled. He's still himself and still has loyalty to the Doctor, but now is, being forced by the Overseer to basically spy on them, and eventually rats them out and denies the fact that him and Polly are later attacked by Big Crab. Ben, after ratting them out, basically gets the other 3 to now go into the mines to mine for crab gas for big crabs, but they're able to sneak out. My favorite little bit is when Jamie is found by some of the dancers who are dancing for the Overseer, and he shows them how to do a little dance, which is just a way for him to escape and fling himself out a door. Soon enough, they are able to convince the pilot about big crabs, and then despite the fact that the Overseer, who of course is actually Big Crab, they are able to pump the opposite air into their crab den and basically blow up all of the big crabs. The mentioned big crabs are of course the Macra, who are firstly named after the genus name of the Japanese spider crab. I'm not going to say it, and I'm just going to put it on screen. And they were originally giant spiders all the way up until filming, until they made the prop for the Macra, of which looks a lot worse than its 3D model. Hell, they even mentioned to be big bugs, which actively confused me for a sec. It's not entirely inaccurate, but, this even more so than the previous story, but maybe, probably on the same level, to be honest, isn't liked by a majority of the people that were part of it. Both the producer and actors did not like how the Macra looked. They thought they were very dumb, especially because they were big, vaguely crab-looking things shoved on the back of vans, of which didn't work properly. Fraser Hines specifically described the Macra as rubbish, which just, God, yeah, they do initially look absolutely terrible. There is surviving footage of some of this, even though the full episodes do not exist, and from the little bits you can see, it looks terrible. Thankfully, the animation recreation looks so much better. The set looks a lot more interesting. The crabs look a lot better. There's more than one on screen. You can even see their den. That wasn't even in the initial episode. And it does a lot more to really give the Macra, or as I call them, big crabs. It's weird that they can mind control people in such a way that they did, and it is kind of funny to see Secret Overseer is secretly something else type story, which certainly has been done and will be done in the future of Doctor Who. This one kind of gives like a Galaxy 4 kind of thing, you know, of I know it's not a good story, but it's just kind of fun, right? The Macra give like a Chumbly vibe, and I just have fun with this story. It's not a great story, and certainly when you look at like its original version, no, that's smart, doesn't really do anything new, and it has, you know, what it has, but I find it fun. I'll note that there are some good character moments here, and there is some cool moments with the Second Doctor kind of outsmarting people in order to get around, you know? He like breaks a lock with his whistle. P.S. He has a little like recorder that he plays in like every episode since literally moment one after turning into his new form, so, you know, that's why we love Patrick Troughton's Second Doctor. But if you're looking for like a good story, you're not going to get that out of the Macra Terror. So if you're looking for like a hidden gem in some way, yeah, no. Oddly, the Macra do return way later. I'm assuming the like place that they are is probably New Earth, because they are seen in the underground of New Earth later on. So it's entirely possible. P.S. I wanted to mention the fact that the entire time Enoch Willis had to have a awful looking like short hair wig, and I don't know why. The animated version of her looks kind of cute with it, but when you look at the real her with a pixie cut, it is clear that is not what she cut her hair as. They put a wig on her, which is what she said years later, even though some people believe that's how she actually cut her hair. Of course, now we come to the faceless ones. Written by Malcolm Duke and David Kircham under the pen name David Ellis. Both had previously submitted various stories to the Doctor Who producers, of which got just thrown out all over the place and were never used. But thankfully they were good friends with Jerry Davis, who were like, hey, come on to our show and write a story for us. They then wrote one called The Big Story, which would have been about shapeshifters hiding out in a department store. Instead, they ultimately rewrote it, not just to change its setting, but also the fact that producer Inez Lloyd was very unhappy with the fact that the last several episodes were all 4-parters, and he wanted a 6-parter, mostly for budgetary reasons. Thus, director Jerry Mill had to help them just expand this into a longer story for as long as possible, and thus we get probably one of the most boring stories out of the entirety of Doctor Who. Most of this season, I feel like, is a season of episodes that are just kind of okay and maybe a little bit boring, which also includes the ones that we talked about in our William Hartnell episode, and this one is probably the worst of them. Genuinely, this is the worst episode of Season 4. What happens? Well, the Doctor and friends get stuck at an airport, and that's it! That's what happens! They get stuck at an airport, and yes, there is a secret society of aliens who are chameleon people that are stealing teens and pretending to be them, and they're trying to just replace people, but they end up not being that bad of people. They don't like kill the people, they just shrink them and shove them somewhere, and later the Doctor is able to reason with them to bring them back, right? The only really important part of this is the fact that Ben and Polly are kidnapped very early on in the story, so it's mostly Jamie showing off the fact that he really will be a helpful companion, and being helped by some other character. Samantha Briggs, whose brother was captured by the chameleon guys, was supposed to be a new recurring companion, actually. Despite begging from Fraser Hines and Inez Lloyd, Pauline Collins turned down the offer, but would later reappear as Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw, like 40-ish years later, which is quite crazy. I do not care for this episode. I find it incredibly boring. It is another episode of the Doctor needing to convince someone that there is bad guys doing bad guy things for like the 5th time in this fucking season, with them not believing him till the bad guys show up and do bad guy things, of them going, oh, we're replacing people, whoop-de-doo, and then they actually have to do something now. All the rest of the stories this season, I'd say, are fine, right? They're watchable. I can't really recommend them as good stories, because all of them really feel like very typical 60s sci-fi stuff and really aren't Doctor Who's best. This storyline is just awful. It's so goddamn boring. Nothing happens. They get stuck in an airport? An airport in Doctor Who? You're gonna set in a whole 6-part storyline in an airport? For God's sakes. I'd rather it be a department store that they can't escape from. At least they're not just like stuck at an airport. I cannot recommend this story, and I'm kind of glad it's mostly missing. 1 and 3 are still existing, but of course all of them were recreated in animation, and if you're going to watch them, that is of course the recommended way of watching them, because God knows, you don't want to watch just pictures on screen, but you also kind of want to check out what the show looked like in its still existing form, so it's always good when there is actually existing episodes for not just this one, but all of the stories that have been animated, to make sure you check out the actual existing episodes, because God knows it's cool that we have them at all. Episode 3, one of the only 2 episodes that still exist, was returned in 87 alongside episode 2 of Evil of the Daleks by a collector who found them at a car boot sale a couple years before. It seems the copy of episode 3 was damaged because apparently the guy kept watching it over and over again. I get that it's cool to have a missing episode, but if you don't have the rest of the stories, what's the point? This episode is notable for 2 things. It is the new theme that'll be here for a little while for the rest of the Second Doctor's time, which will go in with the new opening that was introduced in the previous story, and also it's the last appearance of Ben and Polly. So, as always, let's talk about our companions and the actors as we say goodbye to Ben and Polly so soon after being introduced to them. Ben Jackson and Polly Wright, in terms of the characters, have a pretty short history. They haven't really appeared in much else since, besides small appearances here and there. Any other appearances in other media is during the same time frame of them going from story to story, which oddly they had to make up ways for it to make any sense, considering how connected these episodes are from the ending of one to another. It's just kind of funny. They tried to stay in a relationship for a while, but according to Mondes Pasting, they eventually broke up, and in the New Year's of 86, they eventually met up and reminisced, but by that point, Ben was already married. Of course, by the point of 99, as seen in The Time I Nearly Destroyed the World Whilst Looking for a Dress, I hate long titles like that, they end up meeting again in another weird little Second Doctor adventure where they end up rekindling their romance. Sarah Jane Adventures Death of the Doctor episode later showed that they were running an orphanage in India in 2010, and Farewell Sarah Jane later says that they're still there in 2020. Unlike whilst during her time as Polly on television, she was married to Michael Gough, who of course was initially the original Celestial Toymaker. They had 2 children, Jasper and Polly. She would not stay married to Michael Gough throughout her time. She would later remarry twice throughout her life, and she would live in various places for the 16 years after leaving the UK in 1980, until finally settling down back in the UK in 96. During that time, she gave up acting in order to be a mother, and also for gardening. It's very interesting. She decided she had other important things in her life, and I firmly respect her for leaving the acting business for something she decided was important. However, she would come back to Polly a few times, mostly through audio plays, and not just that, would be notably the mother of companion Charlotte Pollard in the audio dramas Louisa Pollard, and that's pretty cool that she can kind of come back as a whole other character, something that certain other actors have done throughout Doctor Who's history. She is still a big fan of the franchise and still goes to different fan conventions, and it's really cool to see her there. A different story is Michael Craze. Michael Craze, who went into acting by pure chance, he discovered through his Boy Scout shows that he had a perfect boy soprano voice, and ultimately this won him parts in The King and I and Plain and Fancy. His first television role would be a show called Family Solicitor for Granada, and he would continue to get roles over time. Oddly, this wouldn't be it though. At the age of 20, he wrote, directed, and acted in a film called The Golden Head, which won him an award, which is crazy. What am I doing with my life at 26? And would later find a film company called Mantic, and later produce an award-winning short film titled Fragment, which is crazy. His brother, having previous roles in this series, would get him the role at Doctor Who, which of course, there he would meet the assistant floor manager, Edwina Werner, who he would later marry after leaving the show in 68. Two, of course, would later have a son named Ben. Craze would appear in less stuff over the 70s, most notably appearing in 2 cult horror films, Satan's Slave in 76 and Terror in 78, and later in the horror romance film Neither the Sea Nor the Sand in 72. In the 80s, he only acted occasionally and managed a pub and seemingly lived a pretty happy life. His brother has mentioned that a whole bunch of times he would go to as many Doctor Who fan conventions as possible, as it seems he also loved the series all the way up until his unfortunate passing. Craze would unfortunately die of a heart attack on 8th of December 1998. He had fallen down some steps the previous day while picking up his neighbor's paper for her, and owing to a heart condition, was unable to be operated on. It's unfortunate. It seems that the guy had a very happy life after the end of his acting career and after leaving Doctor Who. It's never fun when you hear stories like this, especially when you grow to like who they played on TV. I'll say right now that Ben and Polly as characters aren't really the most interesting of a duo. They're not going to go like anywhere high up in my favorite companions ranking, as I really don't feel like they ever really showed off who they were as characters after their first appearance, and maybe they were a little bit right in that bringing Jamie in kind of lessened the focus on them. Polly ended up often being a damsel in distress, and Ben ended up being the guy that does what the Doctor tells him to do, except that one time that he literally couldn't. But despite their characters being probably the least interesting part of this season, the two actors that played them are clearly very talented individuals that led very happy lives and very fulfilling lives, and that is absolutely in no doubt at all. It's clear that despite everything, they left a very positive impression by the fan base, and a lot of people really enjoyed their characters as they celebrate their characters and their actors after all of these years later. I'm not gonna say it sucks to see Ben and Polly leave, as I kind of prefer it just be the Doctor, Jamie, and one of the two daughters that our favorite gay dads will now have over the next 2 seasons, which I will now be referring to them as. But it is unfortunate to see these characters leave because, you know, I was starting to kind of warm up to them a bit. To end our season, we have The Evil of the Daleks, written by David Whittaker and directed by David Marinus from Galaxy 4 and The 10th Planet. The series was intended to be the Doctor's final battle with the Daleks. This is the right story to end a season with, certainly, as it is a big 7-part, very climactic adventure. This was actually meant to get the Daleks their own spin-off TV show, which Terry Nation would hope to produce in the US. Yeah, it's not like the producers hated the Daleks and wanted to get rid of them, or because Terry Nation partially owned them, even though, you know, it is to get them their own show, right? The reason you don't have a character on a main show is because they're going to be on the spin-off show, you know? It's a whole Worf thing. But that ended up not happening for years, and we now, after this story, didn't have Daleks for an incredibly long time, besides little cameos here and there. Thankfully, we'll eventually get the Daleks coming back, and will be a major part of the show then going forward, but after this storyline, it's bye-bye to the Daleks for a good minute. The first true live-action appearance of the Dalek Emperor, who had appeared in a couple comics and books previously, now is a big, large canister that is in charge of the Daleks, which we'll see as the story goes on. Only 2 episodes exist in the BBC archives, with all of them being recreated in a very well-done animation, probably the best of the animations, to be honest. The TARDIS is stolen by a very rich and strange man who seems to confuse even the people that work for him, and in the most roundabout way possible is mostly just to get the Doctor to get to him. Why he couldn't just brought him there is probably because the people who are making him do this are telling him to do it in this way. Either way, he brings them to his place and brings them to 1866, in which he tells them he has to help them, or else the people who are holding his daughter hostage are going to blow up not just his daughter, but also the Doctor's TARDIS. The man is Edward Waterfield, and his daughter is, of course, the next main companion, Victoria Waterfield. The Daleks want to make the Doctor give him the human factor, TM, which will basically allow them to control humans in some way. Essentially, they make Jamie go through a crazy obstacle course and get nearly murdered by a large mute man, while the Doctor seemingly runs tests on how he's feeling throughout all of that, while being constantly annoyed by 2 people. Theodore Maxtable, the guy who apparently is also part of this, who we soon find out is in league with the Daleks, and is also there to find out time travel and also alchemy from them. He is a hypnotist and is also partially the reason why they were able to kidnap Victoria in the first place. He also hypnotized his, son-in-law, which is the reason why throughout the episode, he'll be running around being a bit of a D-bag. That's the last I'll mention that character. He is in several parts of the story and is clearly there to waste time to make it go longer. After all of that, they're able to make positronic brains, which make the Daleks supposedly more human, but it's actually after they're all brought to Skaro to find the Dalek Emperor, he reveals that the reason they wanted him to make the human factor, TM, is so that they can make the Dalek factor, TM, to turn humans into Daleks. But not like, really? Truly just to mind control them, and it's like, dog, you should have just got the crabs. Like, what? Eventually the Doctor reverses this, turns a bunch of Daleks into funny, nice Daleks and has them blow up the Dalek Emperor. Maximum is killed alongside the Mute Man in the process, and unfortunately, in order to save the Doctor's life from one of the not nice Daleks, Victoria's dad sacrifices himself, so now they decide to bring her along. Unfortunately, it's through the TARDIS, which they now find in Skaro, which, you know, as we know, goes wherever. So now they just kind of have to bring her along, and that's why she is the new companion. I should note that it was also going to maybe be Molly Dawson, who is this cute maid that is throughout the story, and I probably would have preferred her because, honestly, Victoria barely gives much of an actual impression in her first story, but then again, we'll have to see throughout Season 5 on how we feel about Victoria Waterfield. I can, however, say how I feel about the seemingly end of the Daleks, and that is, it's a pretty cool story. It does feel like it wastes a bit of your time with some of its side characters just doing some other shit, and I really become uninterested during those scenes, but everything with Jamie kicking ass, going through like an obstacle course and fighting a big, large man that we saw can like bend beams, pretty cool. The Doctor doing this thing that he'll do through a good majority of the show, which is kind of use his companions a little bit and be a little bit on the like grayer side, is very interesting. We do get to see the Doctor almost kind of do a little bit of an ends justify the means type thing of, I'm sorry, Jamie, but we kind of had to get our time machine back. This obviously being a Dalek story is one that I enjoy because I like seeing the Daleks, but I feel like they made sense in here. This really did feel like more of a genuine plan and something that did build on itself over time. I feel like besides the distractions, it was pretty well paced, and it was just fun to see the Daleks just act very friggin' evil and to have a bigger salt shaker be their leader. I love the look of the Dalek Emperor / the Prime Dalek in this one. He looks so cool. I love the set that they built for Skaro. The sets in general, from what you can see, look very nice, to be honest. It's clear a lot of the budget went into this big finale, and it's very cool for it. I feel like this is a very good showing of Jamie and the Doctor, despite the fact that they are separated for a good majority of the story. How even in the middle of it, like Patrick Troughton takes a whole like vacation, so that's kind of funny. This one I think is a very strong showing of the Daleks, right? I think if this was meant to be the last of the Daleks, this would be a very great story to go off on. The Doctor outsmarting them in such a way is a great showing of what makes the Doctor great, and it's a final little bit of, if you didn't think this was the Doctor, now you know. It's weird to see a season full of 2 Cybermen and 2 Dalek stories, but here you go, I guess. This one is a very, very good one and a definite recommendation. I'll note that, yeah, the leadership of the Daleks is a little bit confusing. I'm going to say right now, I'm pretty sure the Dalek Emperor, at least it is said in other places, is the Prime Dalek, the first Dalek. The Dalek we kind of see in the funny little David Tennant short that they made where he gave him the idea for the plunger, and that this mutant that's inside is a little bit bigger and more like a brain, which is why he's in the bigger salt shaker, and that the later Dalek Emperor that we see is this same Dalek Emperor that was brought back in this little short that we see older versions of these same characters, both Jamie and Victoria Waterfield, as he kind of was brought back, I'm assuming for the Time War, but in between the leader will be one of the Dalek Supremes, the black-colored Daleks that we saw throughout the last several Dalek stories. The one, in fact, specifically, apparently, that was in the Daleks Master Plan will apparently be the current leader. I'd imagine due to a bunch of these in this story, there is a couple Dalek Supremes, and that they're all sent in their own missions, and then the last surviving one is the new leader of the Daleks, eventually until the, return of Davros, and then after the end of the Civil War of Daleks, which again we'll get to way later, in which he does actually explode, and then they bring back the Emperor Dalek, the original Prime Dalek, for the Time War. That's my little headcanon, because if you try to wonder who is the Emperor and Prime and Supreme and Leader, you'll just get incredibly confused because there's so many sources saying so many different things. Doctor Who just be weird like that. So let's get to the end of Season 4. I feel like The Evil of the Daleks is a very solid finale to the series, and I feel like it's a definite good way to end not just those characters, but also the second Doctor's first year of being the Doctor. Several storylines I feel in this season are not all that strong. It's very much an okay season, you know? There's a good reason why a lot of this season is a bit of a blur to me when I went back to it, of I didn't know how I thought of these stories, right? And the answer is because it's kind of forgettable. None of these stories really do anything new or interesting, and they aren't all that good. And with it being the most missing season, it's a hard season to get through. Including the stories with William Hartnell, I'm gonna say that here is my little ranking of the season 4 episodes, and I must say this is a season that I, for a good majority of it, have to say is pretty skippable. It's not a great season. Certainly not a bad season. A lot of the episodes are okay, but that's it. It is passable sci-fi at best. Sorry to say that I don't have too much to really say about this season. Production went okay, besides like a couple flubs, and besides the notable fact that this is, again, the most missing season, Season 4 is just a kind of plain season that isn't really worth talking about all too much, besides the very important thing that just happens to be in it. But next season, Season 5, will be more positive and certainly more in general to say, as we get more into why I enjoy the Second Doctor so much, as now him and Jamie is a major focus in the show, as our favorite two sci-fi gay dads have their daughter, and then later on, their funny aunt. But until then, I've been the Movie-a-thoner. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and subscribe, and leave in the comments what other stuff I should be doing for videos. And most importantly, stay good, stay safe.